Hello, I'm Tom Hogan, Director of Publications and Software for Osborne Computer Corporation, and I'm here to show you on this tape how simple the utilities that we supply with the Osborne One computer are to use. First, we need to turn on the computer, which is simply to reach around behind the machine and turn on the power switch. The Osborne computer, when it is turned on, immediately prompts you for the first thing that you are to do, which is to insert a diskette into drive A, the left-hand drive, and then to press the return key to start the system. All of our software works this way, and this is a system that you get used to very quickly. Very simple. The diskette that we're going to start with is the CPM system diskette, which contains all of the Osborne supplied utilities that you would normally use. This is a diskette that you will use a lot. You use it to copy other diskettes. You use it to format new diskettes if you want to create a blank diskette to store information onto. You will also use it for other types of things like setting up your machine so that it can use a printer for the first time. The proper way to handle the diskette is to take it out of its sleeve. And notice how I did that I took it out of the sleeve with the label side up, with my hand, basically my thumb and my forefinger in the center of the diskette, and pulled it out of its protective cardboard sleeve. Now, the critical thing about diskettes is to make sure that you do not touch the area that the disk head, which comes and reads information off the diskette, is going to use, which is this notched area, which is what's going to get inserted into the computer. We'll now take the diskette, label side up, and gently slide it into the disk drive and close the door behind it. Now, that is a simple process. It's one that's very quickly learned. It's one in which you should have no trouble comprehending. The critical thing, again, is to make sure that you do watch that you have the label side up. Otherwise, the disk will not be read correctly by the machine. And now the second component of that first simple step is to press the return key on the keyboard, which I'll do right now. Now, at the point where I press the return key, you probably hear the disk drive whirring behind me. At the point I press the return key, the computer does some things automatically. And depending upon which diskette that you're using, depends on what's done automatically. Now, on the CPM system diskette, the utility programs are on that diskette. And the very first utility program on that diskette is one called Help, which is an orientation to the Osborne computer system. And what happens is that the machine immediately loads the Osborne logo onto the screen and says that it's loading Help and CPM. And then a few moments later, you'll see this display, the Help display, on your screen, which says Osborne One Computer Help 2.1 at the top of the screen. If you look very carefully at this display, you will notice that there are 26 choices. It says press A to get information about the CPM assembler. Press B to find out about CBasic. Press C for CPM commands. Very simple process. If you would like information about any of those subjects, any of those 26 subjects, you very simply press the key associated with it. For instance, if you're interested in seeing the self-portrait of the Osborne computer, you'd press the Z key, and immediately you would see the self-portrait of the Osborne computer displayed. And this particular self-portrait has all of the information that appears on the front panel of the machine. All of this information is labeled so that you could compare the two if you wanted to. To get back to the menu, you press the return key, and that's how this whole Help program works. Now, remember, that Help program is loaded automatically when you first turn on the machine, when you put in the CPM diskette and press return. The Help program gets loaded automatically. Now, what you might be asking is, how do I get out of the Help program? If you've looked at the Help program, and for instance, I'll just step through some of the messages real quickly here, and you'll get an idea that there's a lot of information in this program that will help you learn about the computer if you need some extra help besides the manual. Once you're done stepping through this and you've got all the information that you need at this point, very simply press the Escape key, ESC. It stands for Escape. And the machine will start CPM. CPM is the operating system, and by an operating system I mean That is the software component that makes the machine talk to all the other individual components that you might have plugged into it, and for that matter, the components that exist internally within the machine. At this point, what I'd like to do is describe one thing that you see on your screen at this point, and that's the A greater than sign. If you look carefully at the display, you will see that there's a message at the top, but the important thing to look at is the A greater than sign. Now this A greater than is meaningful information. The A means that the current active drive, anything that you do without telling the computer otherwise, will happen on the A drive, or the left-hand drive of the machine. The greater than simply stands for CPM is waiting for a command. Therefore, A greater than means CPM is waiting for a command and will be using the A drive unless you tell it otherwise. Since I only have a diskette at this point in the A drive, that's fine with me because all the programs that I have access to at this point are on that diskette. Let's try looking at that diskette. One very common command in CPM, very useful command, and you'll get used to using it over and over and over again, is the dir command. If you look at the screen now, you'll see that I've typed dir, which stands for directory. It's short for directory. And if I press the return key, you'll notice that what appears on the screen immediately is a list of the files on the diskette. Now, if you're familiar with the Apple computer, you would equate this command, the dir command, with the catalog command. There are other systems that use the same command, but the name of its files. But the action is the same. You type dir and you get a list of the files that are on the diskette. In this case, if you look at the screen, you'll see that we have auto-st-com, help-com, sysgen-com, stat-com, copy-com, setup-com, pip-com, move-cpm-com, and xdir-com. Those 9 files are the files that are on that particular diskette. Now, there are 2 components to the name of each of those files on the diskette. Notice that each of them have a com, a com at the end of it. That indicates that those are programs, that if we type the name of that program, it will immediately start executing. There are other, that's called the file type. And it can be up to 3 letters long. And com happens to be one that CPM automatically recognizes. But you can name things anything you want to. You could have a 3-letter type, file type of TYP, for instance, or TXT. So you can name files to make sense to you. If it's a program file that's supposed to immediately execute, however, it must have the COM file type. The rest of the file name can be up to 8 characters long. In this case, we don't have any that are greater than 6, but they could be 8 characters long. Or they could be 1 character long, and they can have numbers or letters mixed in. Let's go through this diskette now and look at some of the programs. There are 9 programs on this diskette. Let's look at some of them very quickly. We've already discussed the help program. That was the one that was automatically loaded. And the auto-st program is what does the automatic loading of the help program. So we've already seen those 2 in action. Let's skip down for a minute and look at the last command in our directory. If you look at your screen now, you'll see that I have typed xdir, which is the last file that's in the directory. That stands for extended directory. And the extended directory, when I press return, gives me some additional information besides what's just in the directory command. The extended directory command gives us more than just the list of the names on the diskette. It also gives us some additional information. Looking at the screen, you should be able to see that auto-st-com, just to the right of that, there is a 4K. That indicates that K in computer language stands for 1000, or approximately 1000, which means that the AutoST.com program takes up 4,000 characters of information on the diskette. And likewise, the copy program, which is next, also takes 4,000 characters of information. The help program, which is the most verbose on this diskette, takes 18,000 characters of information. And if you look way down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that disk A uses 2K blocks. In other words, information saved on the diskette in 2,000 character blocks. The overall size of the diskette is 92,000 characters of information can be stored on that diskette. We have 9 files on the diskette, and we've used 64,000 characters of information. And that means we have 28,000 characters of space left on that diskette that we can save other programs, save information onto. Okay, so that's the Dir command. There are other commands on here that are normally used. The Dir command gives you some information about the status of your diskette, and it's quite a handy command. And as a matter of fact, we have put it on every diskette that we supply with your machine. So you'll find Dir comm on all 5 of the diskettes that you receive with your machine. And you can use it the same way on each of those diskettes as I just demonstrated here. The next most useful command probably is the copy command. Now, if I type copy and then press the return key, you'll find that the display changes. The screen clears, and at the top of the screen it says the Osborne Disk Utility Program. The copy program does a little bit more than just copy diskettes. It can also format diskettes. Now, the difference between copying a diskette and formatting a diskette is not a subtle one, but it might, for somebody who's a newcomer to computing, might not make a lot of sense at first. The act of formatting of diskette means to put blank information on that diskette and get it ready to use. The act of copying a diskette means to actually take information off of one diskette and put an exact duplicate onto a second diskette. In other words, to make a second copy of a diskette. Now, we have both options built within our copy program. We have the copy diskettes option, which if you want to do copy of diskettes, you just simply press C. If you want to format diskettes, you simply press F. Most of our software that you will find is all menu-driven. And by menu-driven, I mean it will present information on the screen and give you a choice and a key to press to get that choice. So in this case, if you look at the screen, you'll see that you have C for copy, F for format. Very simple. Well, let's format a diskette. The very first thing I do is press F. And at the point where I do, the screen changes, and it, at the bottom of the screen, tells me, select the diskette to format, A or B. Well, the A or B always refers to disk drives, either the left-hand disk drive or the right-hand disk drive. Now, I'm going to take a blank diskette. As you can see, it has no label. I just took it out of the box, haven't used it yet. I will take this diskette and format it, use the format program to put blank information onto that diskette. I'll put this diskette into the second drive, into the right-hand drive, which is referred to by CPM as the B drive. B as in boy, or B for Baker if you're from the old Army school. You close the door over the diskette, and now the prompt on the screen is asking me, select diskette to format, A or B. Well, I just put the diskette into drive B. So let's type B and see what happens. Okay, our software also has a backstop. In other words, it will never let you do something that would destroy data on a diskette without having a fail-safe. In other words, I said I wanted to format data onto the diskette in drive B. It's now asking one more time to make sure and giving me one more chance before I go on and format that diskette. because when I do format that diskette, I write over any information that was previously on that diskette. Now, that diskette that I took out happened to be out of a box of brand new diskettes, so I'm not worried about it. But if you were formatting a diskette you have used before, and you suddenly thought, gee, I might need this information, at this point, the thing to do would be to press the reset button on the front of the computer and start over. It gives you one last chance. Well, I'm going to take that last chance and go ahead and press the return key. What you see on the screen right now is the actual process of formatting going on. There are 40 concentric tracks, or circles, of information on our diskette, each of which has to be formatted. And as each is formatted, an F will appear on the display. Then the copy program goes back and verifies each track. And if the track verifies correctly, you will see a V appear underneath the track number. So what you should end up with is what we see now on our display, a row of Fs and a row of Vs. Now, there is another possibility that could occur, and that is if you have a bad diskette, one that is damaged, you might see an E on either the format or the verify section of the diskette. That happens extremely rarely, but if it does happen, that diskette is not ready to use yet. What you should try is to format the diskette again. If the error occurs in the same place, in other words, if you see the E in the same place on the diskette, then you want to format the diskette again. And try that 3 or 4 times. If that diskette doesn't format after 3 or 4 times, you're pretty sure that you have a bad diskette. Now, if that's a brand new diskette that you bought from your dealer, you should return it to your dealer and make sure that you get an exchange because you've got some defective merchandise. And that does happen occasionally. If it's a diskette you've been using, you've probably got a fingerprint on the diskette or somehow otherwise damaged the diskette. In other words, the critical thing here is don't proceed if you see an E on the screen in that row of Fs or the row of Vs. Well, we're done formatting our diskette. The next step is, at this point, since I don't want to format another diskette, I could, looking at the bottom of the screen, you will see that there's a message there that says select diskette to format. In other words, I could format another diskette at this point. Or I could press the return key and go back to the main menu. Pressing the return key takes me back to the main menu of copying diskettes or formatting diskettes. Let's look at the other alternative, which is to copy diskettes. That's the other thing that you will probably be using this utility for quite often. So we'll press the letter C. Notice that the message at the screen bottom now changes to select the source drive for the copy, A or B. By source, we mean the diskette that you want to take information off of. And by destination, we mean the diskette that you want to put information onto. So, I have a diskette in drive A. That was the CPM system diskette that I put in at the beginning of this tape. And I have a diskette in drive B, a blank diskette. So why don't we take the information off of drive A and make a copy of it on drive B? I'll do that by just pressing the letter A at this point, because that's the source. Again, the software will prompt us one last time, put the source diskette in drive A, put the destination diskette in drive B. If you haven't done so at this point, be sure that you do before you press return. The software now, when I press return, reads 10 tracks or 10 circles of information off of the first diskette and then writes them onto the second diskette. And this process takes just slightly over a minute. It's now working on the second 10 tracks, and it's now writing the second 10 tracks. And it'll go back and forth between this process until it's done all 40 tracks of information. If an error occurs, it will be reported on the screen, and it'll ask you to try the copy process again. And the same thing applies to copy as applied to format. If you encounter an error, try copying the diskette again. If you encounter the error 3 or 4 times in a row, then you try formatting the diskette. If you encounter an error formatting the diskette, you probably have a bad diskette. Copy process is almost done. At the very end of the process, you'll hear the disk drive make a funny noise, and then you will see the message, copy completed successfully. The funny noise as usual. All that is that the head is all the way to the inside of the diskette and has to come back to the outside of the diskette, and that's just the process of moving it out there that makes that noise. So that's all there is to copying a diskette. You notice that only took approximately a little over a minute. Very easy process, very simple process. All you have to do is specify the information first of what diskette to copy from, and everything else is done automatically. Now, I should mention one other thing about the copy process, and that's that the copy process also formats the diskette. In other words, you do not have to first format a diskette before you use copy. Copy will also do a format of the diskette as it's copying information. I'm going to press return to get back to this main menu of the copy program, and press return one more time. I'm going to type dir to get a directory of the diskette so you can see the files, and we'll display them on your screen now. And we have those 9 files on the screen. Well, there's only one other program that you'll use day in, day out that you would use with some frequency, and that's a program called Setup. It's a program you should always run the first time you create a new diskette. And after you've used it the first time on that diskette, then you shouldn't have to do it unless you make changes to that diskette or you make a change to your system, like change the printer that you're using. So let's type the name Setup. And again, I should be re-emphasizing the fact that in CPM, to run a program, you type the program's name. The program's name is Setup. You very quickly get a question that's asked of you when you start the setup program as to which diskette you would like to configure. Well, we just created a new diskette in drive B, so let's go ahead and configure that diskette, set it up. I'll press B. After a few moments, you'll find that the screen clears again and a new menu of information is presented on the screen. Again, I emphasize that all of our software is menu-driven, which means you type a letter to do a choice. And you have 6 things that you can do with the setup program. You can change the printer that you're using, the type of printer that you're using. You can change the baud rate of the serial port, which is that usually the only time that you would do that is if you change your printer. You can change the assumed screen size, the point at which the machine does a carriage return automatically. And you can change the automatic horizontal scrolling, or machine, if you remember from earlier videotapes or from other materials that you've seen about it, always considers that the actual video display, what you see on your screen as you're using the computer, is just a window on a bigger screen. Now, if you look at the screen, you can see that there are 24 lines of characters and 52 characters across the screen. I don't want you to sit there and count them. Take my word for it. There are 52 characters across the screen. But the screen is actually much larger, and what I'm going to do now is actually scroll the screen and move it. Now, we're not using any of this other portion of the screen. We're not using any of it, but it does exist, and on some programs there will be information out to the right or to the left or down or up that you can get to by using the scrolling feature of the machine. Now, the automatic horizontal scrolling means that the machine will follow, if there's information off the side of the screen, will follow automatically if there is, so that you can see it. The other 2 features in the setup program that you would want to use are the function keys and the arrow keys. The arrow keys, there are 4 arrow keys on the Osborne keyboard. Those arrow keys can be configured for different pieces of software. For instance, the WordStar word processing program that we supply uses those arrow keys differently than does CPM. So you can make the change to the diskette to tell it whether or not you want the WordStar interpretation of those keys or the CPM interpretation of those keys. The function keys are a little more difficult to describe. Function keys are actually something that you can come up with yourself. You invent them. They are keys that type a phrase a special command, maybe a combination of commands that you use often, and instead of typing out the whole thing, what you want to do is simply type one character and get the whole thing. For instance, if you found that you were typing the word anti-disestablishmentarianism over and over and over again, I happened to find myself doing that once because I was trying to describe how to use the function keys in our manual, so I set up the function keys to put in anti-disestablishmentarianism. In other words, what I did is I programmed the function keys. And I will go ahead and show you what I did in that case. I programmed function key number 0. If you look at the screen now, at the bottom of the screen you see it says 97 character places remaining, and there's a 0, and my cursor is just to the right of that. Now I can type in the word anti-disestablishmentarianism. And if I didn't make any mistakes in my spelling, that is the correct spelling of anti-disestablishmentarianism, and that's what I'm going to program into that function key. I just press the escape key twice, and now I've typed the word anti-disestablishmentarianism as function key number 0. Now what that means is that from here on out, any time that I hold down the control key on the keyboard and press 0, in other words, control 0, the computer will automatically type the word anti-disestablishmentarianism for me. So with one keystroke, I get all those characters in one fell swoop. Now I have 10 keystrokes that I can do that with. Control 0, Control 1, Control 2, etc. all the way through to Control 9, which means that I can set up 10 shorthand notations on the machine that could be commands, words, or anything else. In this case, I've set up a word, but it could be a command also. I have now returned to the main menu of the configuration program. You can see that my function key is sitting there, and not only that, it goes all the way over to the right and writes over a part of the arrow key message. But I can now change any of the other things I want to on this particular setup. And what I want to describe to you is a toggle effect. A toggle means that something is either on or off. And if it's off and you toggle it, it becomes on. If it's on and you toggle it, it becomes off. Well, several of the options on this screen are toggles. For instance, the baud rate is a toggle. If you look very closely now at your screen and watch in the upper right-hand corner, B baud rate, it says 1200 immediately underneath it, which is the current setting of the baud rate. Now, if I press the letter B, notice that it toggles. And that as I keep pressing the letter B, I toggle or change back and forth between 300 and 1200. So that's one toggle. A second toggle, if you just keep watching that screen, but just below that, the automatic horizontal scroll, if I press the letter D, that will toggle on and off. I have now toggled it back to on. The other two options that we haven't dealt with yet are the printer and the screen size. Now when I press A for printer, immediately the screen changes and we get a new menu display. If you look at this menu, you will notice that we have a choice of 5 different types of printers. The Osborne one is an extremely flexible machine. You can plug in standard serial printers, which are the most common that you'll find in the marketplace. Cume printers, which are a special word processing, high quality printer. Also, Diablo is very much like the Cume, but it uses a different type of what's called a protocol, a set of instructions to tell it how to print out. Centronics printers, which are also very popular, like the Epson, the Centronics, the Okidata, all use that interface. And PET printers are printers that use the IEEE 488 protocol, another set of instructions on how to get information to the printer. So there's a wide range of printers that you can use with the Osborne computer. And very simply, all you have to do is tell the Osborne once, on each diskette that you use, which printer you have. And you do so by pressing the letter of the type of the printer you have. Now notice that it says current printer is standard serial. Let's change that at this point by pressing a key, and I'm going to press C because I happen to have a Diablo printer. And when I do so, you'll notice that the current printer setting changes. At the bottom of the screen, it says that if we want to get back to the main menu, we press X. So I'll do that now. Okay, we have discussed so far all but one of the functions of the setup program, and that last function is the screen size. Screen size works very much just like the printer. When I press the key associated with screen size, C, we will get another menu of information, and that menu of information will give me some other selections to make. So let me go ahead and do that now. You now see that we have three selections, A, B, or C. And C is a question mark. Well, what that means is that if I want to set the width of the screen at 52 characters, I press A. At 128 characters, I press B. And if I want to set it at anything else, any number between 1 and 128, for instance, if I want to mimic another computer, the Apple happens to have 40 characters on a line, so I could mimic the Apple computer by pressing C, and notice that my cursor replaced the question mark. I type 40 and press the return key, and my new current screen size is 40 characters. To get out of this particular sub-menu, we press the X key as it explains at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so we're back to looking at our settings, and I have changed a number of settings and put a bunch of information onto the screen. We now have the choice of getting out and saving the settings that we've set up. We press X to exit, and then we will be asked a question at the very bottom of the screen, destination A, B, or X to exit. What that means is, at this point, I can save those settings that I just made on drive A, on drive B, or not save them at all by just exiting out of the program. Now, we originally got this system off of the diskette that was in drive B, so at this point the appropriate thing would be to write that system back onto the diskette in drive B, so I would press the letter B. And when I do that, the disk drive will activate for a moment, and it will begin saving the system back onto drive B, and after a few more moments we'll be back to CPM, and you'll see the A greater than sign appear on the bottom of the screen. Quite see because it was going off the bottom of my monitor, which cuts off just a little bit of the overall screen. We're now back to CPM, and we've explored basically the most useful and the utilities that you'll use most often that are on that diskette. The help program, which gives you information about the Osborne system and the things that you can hook up to it. The copy program, which allows you to copy and format diskettes. The Dir program, which not only gives you a directory of the diskettes, but gives you some statistics about what's on those diskettes. In other words, how big the programs or the files are on the diskettes. And the setup program, which allows you to change the assumed configuration when you use a diskette. Things like what kind of printer you use, what size the screen size will be, what the arrow keys do, and the function keys that you program yourself, your shorthand keys. And that's basically it for the CPM system diskette. Hi, I'm Tom Hogan, Director of Software and Publications for Osborne Computer Corporation, and this videotape addresses the word processing capabilities of the Osborne 1 computer, and specifically the WordStar software. Now, one of the diskettes that we provide with our machine is the WordStar Mail Merge diskette. This diskette contains all the word processing programs and information to do word processing on our computer and to merge things like data files so that you can do form letters addressed to a number of people and do the same form letter addressed to different people. This diskette operates just like any other diskette on our machine. You very simply take it out of its case, slide it, label side up, into the drive A. Now in this case, I am also going to work with some data. I happen to have a blank formatted diskette here that I will put into drive B. Normally any files that you would be working with, text files, data files, that you want to process using WordStar, would go onto a diskette into drive B. I have my WordStar diskette in drive A, data files in drive B. Just for the heck of it, I'll go ahead and press the reset button again to make sure the machine has been reset. And now I will follow the instructions like I told you in earlier videotapes. You insert the diskette in drive A and press return. So I press the return key. At this point, the machine says it's loading WordStar, it's displaying the Osborne logo. And a few moments later, you'll see the MicroPro WordStar program display a message on the screen. And eventually, after yet a few more moments, you will see a message at the top of the screen which says Editing No File. The Editing No File screen is basically the master menu for WordStar. It dictates what you can do with this program. You can do a lot of things with this program, as it turns out, not just process documents as you would with normal word processing programs. If you read the entire display, you would see that you can create or edit documents, create or edit non-documents, and by non-documents, MicroPro refers to non-documents as things like programs and data. So you can edit programs using WordStar, and you can edit data files using WordStar if you wish to. You can merge print files. In other words, you can take information from a data file and merge it into some word processing software. An example of that might be if you have a mailing list of, let's say, 100 people that you want to send a letter to, and then you want to combine that mailing list with the letter, and then also create envelopes. That's what merge printing is all about. You merge the data and the word processing together. You can also do things like turn the directory, file directory off. WordStar gives you a directory of files on the diskette without you having to type the CPM command for directory. In this case, we just simply press the letter F. You'll notice that as I do this back and forth, you'll notice that the files are shown and then taken off, not shown. You can also change the disk drive that you're using, and since I did say that we wanted to use text on the second disk drive B, let's go ahead and do that right now. What we're going to do is change the logged disk drive. By logged, that means the disk drive that will be used if you do not tell CPM and WordStar otherwise. So let's go ahead and do that. Very simply, in this case, again, it's menu driven, so we press the key, the L key, and now the machine responds with another message which asks you the current log disk drive is used for files except those files for which you enter a disk drive name as part of a file name. Okay, in this case, I want to specify drive B. And the idiosyncrasy of CPM is that when you specify drive names, you must do so with a colon following after the drive name. So drive B is actually B colon. So I have typed B colon and press return, and WordStar will now change the drive to my data diskette. This is normally the very first thing that you would do every time that you use WordStar. You'd start up the system by pressing the return key with the WordStar diskette in drive A, and then put your data diskette into drive B and change the log disk drive using the L command. Press L and type B colon return. Okay, we now have a directory of disk B on our display. Let's go through the other things that are on the Editing No File menu. You can run a program, which means that from within WordStar you can actually go out to CPM and run other programs. For instance, let's say you want to find out how much space is left on the diskette. Well, if you remember, the Dir command gives you a directory of the diskette with the length of the files and the amount of space left on the diskette. So we could run that program from WordStar very simply. And as a matter of fact, let's go ahead and do that right now. And we do that by pressing the R key. WordStar will ask me for the command that it wants, that I want to type. In this case, I want to type XDIR. And after a few moments, we'll get the results of that command, which is the directory of the diskette on the screen, along with the statistics of how big those files are. 4K, 4K, 18K, in other words, 4,000 characters, 4,000 characters, 18,000 characters. And then at the very bottom of the screen, it'll say, hit any key to return to WordStar. And so we can return directly right back to WordStar after executing whatever program that it was that we wanted to run. And you'll notice we're back at the Editing No File menu. On the right-hand side of the Editing No File menu, and I have moved the screen over, I have scrolled it over a little bit to look at the right-hand portion of the screen, you will see another list of things that you can do. You can set the help level. WordStar is a very friendly program in that it will always prompt you with lots of information, at least the way we have set it up, the way it comes from the factory. It prompts you with lots of information all the time and always displays your options at the top of the screen. Now you can turn some of that help off. You can say, don't show me all the help, but show me some of it, the more technical things that I might forget. Or you can turn it all off so that WordStar doesn't help you at all, doesn't use any of the screen to display prompts to ask you what it is you want to do next. For somebody who is just learning WordStar, you wouldn't want to reset the help level. For somebody who's been using WordStar for some time, you might want to set the help level down a couple of notches. And the help levels are set at 0, 1, 2, or 3. Those numbers being 3 being the most help, 0 being the least help. To set a help level, you type H, in this case, because the menu says H is set help level, followed by the number of the help level that you want set, 0, 1, 2, 3. We can also exit back to CPM, that's the X command. We can print a file, which is the P command. We can delete a file. In fact, we can do a number of things that CPM does with other commands. We can delete a file, copy a file, or rename a file, all from within WordStar. So for somebody who's using the word processing capabilities of the Osborne computer, there is no reason that you ever have to leave to go to CPM to do something once you've booted the WordStar diskette. And by boot, I mean start. Let me scroll my screen back. And let's go ahead and see what it's like to try and create a file and actually edit a file using WordStar. Now, we want to edit a document file because we want to use the word processing type commands, the things that allow us to do the pretty formatting of the information and allow us so that we don't have to press return key when we get to the end of the line. So let's press D to create or edit a document file. Let's say that the name of the file is going to be my name, T-H-O-M, Tom, period, TXT. The file type I'm saying is a text file. When I press return, WordStar will tell me that I am editing a new file, create that file, and then after a few moments, display a menu of my options at this point and a blank screen. The whole screen isn't blank. About the bottom 2/3 of the screen is blank. Now, there are some things that I want to point out about what you see displayed right now, even before we type anything. On the very first line, the very top line of your screen, if you look at that first line, you'll notice a bunch of things. First of all, it says that the file that we're editing is B:(Tom, period, TXT. In other words, the file that we're editing is on drive B, its name is Tom, and its type is text. Immediately next to that is the page number we're on, the line number, and the column number. And as we create a document and move through that document, the page number and line number and column number will all change to reflect where you're at this point in the document. Then underneath that information is a bunch of It's the help that I referred to earlier. And that help is giving you the options of what to do. Now, all commands to WordStar, once you're editing a file, are done with what are called control characters. A control character means to hold down the control key and then to press another key in conjunction with that. In other words, it's just like using the shift key on a typewriter to get an uppercase character, except that we're holding down the control key, which is labeled CTRL, instead of the shift key. And so I could type command Control S, Control D. Now that's not doing anything yet because we have no text to operate with. But we'll get to that in just a minute. But that's the way that we tell WordStar commands. If you look at the top of that screen in that help message, you'll notice that it says cursor. And then there's this little up arrow, A equals left word. That particular help message is telling me to move the cursor left one word. I would type a Control A. That's what the little up arrow is all about. That means hold down the Control key while pressing the next key. Okay, so we could go through all of the commands there on the help menu, but for the time being we won't. I just want to make sure that you understand at least one of them before we proceed on. The next thing that I want to call your attention to on the display is what's called the ruler line. Now, the ruler line tells you what your margin and tab settings are currently in WordStar. And at the far left-hand side of the ruler line, there will be an L. And that L indicates the left-hand margin. And in this case, the L is in the far left-hand column, which means that our left margin is 1, column 1. Then there will be hyphens that go across, and each hyphen represents one character space across the line. Each exclamation point represents a tab stop. And as we change tab stops, the exclamation points will either appear, disappear, or move, depending on whether we create or delete or move a tab stop. On the far right-hand side of the screen, and I have to scroll the screen over for us to see this right now, but let's go ahead and scroll over. On the far right-hand side of the ruler line, you'll see an R, which in this case indicates the right-hand column margin, which is set at 65 at this point. And that's the normal default setting that comes up when you use WordStar for the first time. Let me scroll back. Let's go ahead and type some text in with WordStar and see what effect that has and how all those components that I just told you about kind of relate to the overall word processing. Now, normally when you type text, it's a word processor like the Osborne one will function very much like a typewriter. Certain commands will be different, and you'll be able to do a little bit more and erase and change things without having to go back and actually scratch something off of a piece of paper. But the basic premise, type something in and get to the end of a page, is still there. So let me do some typing. One of the wonderful things that everybody wants to type in is now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their party. If you're watching the screen now, you should see that the cursor is following me. I got to the right-hand edge of the screen, and because there was still more to go on this line, the screen started to follow me. Let's do that again. I'm getting very close to the edge of the screen. Now watch what happens. The whole screen is moving over with me as I type. That's what is referred to as an automatic horizontal scrolling. In other words, as I get to the right-hand margin and I want to go farther than the right-hand margin, WordStar will follow me. Okay, I now have 2 lines of text. Now as the time for all good men to come to the aid of their party, and now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their party. Well, there's a mistake in that first line. This is where word processing starts to increase your productivity over normal typing. If you start making mistakes, the correction time with word processing is generally much less than it is with regular typing. Let's go back up and change that as, AS, to an is, IS. Well, my cursor, which is the little underline character, is now sitting down in row 3. or line 3, in column 1. As a matter of fact, if I look at the top of the screen, it tells me that I'm on page 1, line 3, column 1. To move the cursor, I can do one of several things. I can either use the arrow keys on the right-hand side of the keyboard, or I can use some control keys, the control keys that I mentioned earlier. Let's say I want to go up 2 lines. Well, if I look at the top of my screen, I'll see I want to move the cursor up a line. That is Control E. Control E equals up line. You can see that the help message is clearly presented there. So let's do that. I'll hold down the control character and press E. I did it once and the cursor moves up once. I do it twice and the cursor moves up again. Now to go right a character, I have to scroll over so you can see this a little bit. Control D equals the character to the right. Now I'm moving my cursor to the right. The cursor keys in WordStar for a good typist are laid out very naturally. If you look very closely at the position of my hand, my control key is going to be pressed by my little finger. And then the up key is going to be E, the left key is going to be S, the right key is going to be D, and the down key is X. And if you look very carefully at that, that forms a diamond, up, left, right, down. And as a matter of fact, left word is A and right word is F. Those are also consistent with that diamond. Up a portion of the screen is R, down a portion of the screen is C. Those are also consistent with that diamond. And for a touch typist, somebody who's got their hands on the keyboard in the home position, holding the control key down and using those cursor keys is actually easier than coming over here and using the arrow keys. Because to use the arrow keys, I have to reposition my hands. So for a good touch typist, they'll start developing, or you should start developing, the feel of those cursor control keys that I just showed you. Okay, now our intention here was to go back and fix the mistake. But first I had to show you how to get to the mistake. We get to the mistake by using the control characters. To fix the mistake, I have to type the right characters. Well, in this case, I need an I don't need an A. So I'll type an I. Actually, I managed to type 2 I's. Let's go back and do that again. I type an I, and now I have IAS. Now what's this? Where'd that come from? I've got too many characters in that word now. Well, that's because WordStar is doing something called inserting characters. In other words, wherever my cursor appears, if I start typing away, it will insert characters and push the rest to the right. Notice that my cursor is still on the AS. Well, now I've got a whole bunch of mess to correct. I'm moving my cursor back to the left, and now I will use the Control G command, which deletes characters. And watch what happens. I can delete single characters at a time, or for that matter, I can delete a whole word at a time. Well, by deleting the whole word at the time, now I've lost my as, which I wanted to change to an is. But I just told you that you can use the insert mode to type characters where the cursor is. So you should very quickly come to the conclusion that you could type IS space and correct your mistake. Now let's go back to that again and show you, because I did a whole bunch of things that I normally wouldn't do in trying to correct that mistake. So let's go back and restore things exactly as they were before. We got to the AS in as. We put our cursor there. Normally, I would type an I and then a Control G. The I to get the character I want into there, and then the Control G to delete the character I did not want out. Now, let's expand that principle a little bit and move on to a slightly more complex kind of change. Let's say that we wanted to be a little more fair about our example and not say, now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their party, but to say, now is the time for all good persons or people to come to the aid of the party. People is the correct grammatical one. We can move our cursor. Notice now what I'm doing. I'm moving it a word at a time left, a word at a time right. I'm using that instead of moving the cursor one step at a time because it's faster to get over to the word men, which is the one I want to change. I can do that in a couple of jumps instead of having to move over 40 spaces. or 30, excuse me. I'm in column 30 when I'm on men. I want to change men to people. Well, let's get rid of men. I showed you that you can erase a word at a time, and you do so by holding down the control character and then T. That erases a word. Now we have, now is the time for all good to come to the aid of their party. You don't see the party part right now because we're not over there. We wanted to put people in there. So we very simply type the word people and a space. And what we have effectively done is changed an entire word with very few commands and very few keystrokes. And to actually go down and make a change like that shouldn't take somebody who is proficient at using WordStar more than a couple of seconds. As a matter of fact, you can watch and time me because now I'm going to change the other line to match the top line, and watch how fast it takes me to do that. I'm done. That took me, what, maybe 2 or 3 seconds. So there is one of the distinct advantages of word processing, being able to go in, create a piece of information, and if there are changes that need to be made to that information, to go back and quickly make the modifications without having to retype the rest of it. In other words, to make the change of the word men to people, I only had to change the word men to people. I didn't have to retype now is the time and all the other words that go along with that. So I've saved some time in doing that. Now, your real productivity starts to increase the longer in the document that you work with and the more changes there are in that document, the more productive you'll be with word processing than you would with a standard typewriter. If you're just doing a short little memo that's only a couple of lines, a typewriter is probably just as an effective way of doing it as is a word processor. But if you're going one step further and you're doing a lot of typing, that's where productivity of a word processor starts to show up and starts to really pay off. Now, there are a number of other things that we can do with this word processing program. I mean, I've only shown you so far entering information, deleting pieces of information, and inserting new other pieces of information. Let's do some other things. Let me go back here. Put my cursor in line 1, column 1, and let me get rid of the information that I have on the screen. It's gone. So effectively, with 2 quick keystrokes, I erased everything from the screen. Now, I did that for a reason. I want you to be able to follow very carefully what I do next, because I'm going to show you another feature of the word processing software, and that's the fact that without ever leaving my hand, my little pinky will never touch the return key until I come to the end of a paragraph this time. So what I'm going to do is start typing away. Make sure that you just keep watching me. I'm not going to hit that return key. Whoops. Let me go back and make a change. I can do that right away if I catch it as I'm typing it. Again, the screen starts scrolling as I get to the right. Now, notice that the R is appearing over there in the right-hand portion of the screen. Remember, I told you that that represents the right-hand margin. Well, I'm starting to type past the right-hand margin. And when I type that Y, WordStar automatically wrapped the information around to the next line without me pressing the return key. Now, if you didn't catch that, let me go ahead and type that again. Forgot the word to, so I went back and inserted it. I'm right at the right-hand margin. I press E, which would have put me past the right-hand margin, and without pressing the return key, WordStar automatically wrapped the word onto the next line. Now, that feature is called word wrap. And one of the things that this does for you is that if you have a high-quality printer, when WordStar prints out this document, it will proportionally space or incrementally space out all the spaces in the line so that you get a proportionally spaced document. In other words, the right-hand margin would be aligned perfectly, and the left-hand margin would be aligned perfectly, and the words would be spaced out perfectly in between, which makes for a very clean, very professional, in fact, a somewhat elegant-looking document. That's one way you can usually tell, by the way, if a document has been word processed as opposed to something that's just been typed on a typewriter, is to look at the right-hand margin. If it's all flush, if all the information out there in the right-hand margin is flushed, let me move this over. In other words, if you look at my right-hand margin there, you'll see that the R and the F line up. Then that document was probably word processed. So there's another area where WordStar offers you some productivity, and in this case, some quality enhancements to your work, to your writing. There are a number of other things that I haven't shown you yet about WordStar. I mean, what I want to give you the impression of is that you can do some very simple things, like just type in some text and make quick corrections to it. But I also want to convey to you now some of the more complex things that WordStar can deal with. For instance, one thing that we can do is we can define blocks of characters. In other words, we could say, let's move this sentence to another place in a document. Now, what I need to do first is I need to find a document to work with that's a little longer than this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out. I will get rid of the document I'm working on. And I'm going to create a new document. This time I'm going to call it Tom2 text. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I've started the file Tom2. And there's no text in Tom2 yet. But what I want to do is I created another file earlier, which is called sample text. And I created it on another diskette. What I want to do is bring it into the file Tom2 and then add some information to it. So let's go ahead and do that right now. We type a Control-KR, special command that we haven't seen yet. I'm not going to explain that one in too much detail yet, but we'll get back to it in a second. I type A: because it's on the A disk drive, and then I type the name of the file that I want to read in. And after a few moments, WordStar will grab that file and stick it on my screen. Now, there are a number of reasons why I wanted to bring in sample text, because it shows a whole bunch of other wonderful things that WordStar can do. WordStar is a very, very flexible word processing program, and it allows you to make all kinds of specifications about how a document's going to look and how it's going to print out. And sample text happens to have a number of those in it so that I can show to you. For instance, my cursor is sitting on a dot, and then right next to it is an OP, and I'm moving my cursor back and forth underneath that. Okay, so period OP, what's that mean? That's a command to WordStar, and there are a whole bunch of them that we can specify. In this case, it says omit page numbers. In other words, do not put page numbers on my document because I don't want them. So that's one kind of command that I can give. And these are all called dot commands because they all start with dots and they all start in the left margin. So a dot command that says period OP means omit page numbers. Well, you notice that there's another one immediately underneath it, which is period PL, which says set page length to, in this case, 67. Well, we can do all kinds of things. We can set left margins, right margins, the page length. We can specify information to be printed at the top of every page or at the bottom of every page. We can specify where a page number is supposed to be located: upper left, upper center, upper right, lower bottom left, lower bottom center, or lower bottom right. We can specify all those things plus many, many, many more that are probably a little too complex to deal with in this videotape. But what you should get the idea of is that you can change the looks of a document very quickly by typing a few simple commands. Now, moving down one more line, we come over to, we see the words sample text centered in the screen, but there's something weird about this sample text because on either side of it there is a little up arrow and the letter B. Now what this means is, the centered part of it should be easy to figure out. That text will print out centered on the page when we print it out. But the up arrow B is a special command to WordStar to make that text bold face. In other words, it will print it several times slightly offset, depending on the type of printer that you have, so that that text appears much, much darker than other text that you see on the screen, that you see on the printed page, excuse me. And the one control B must be matched by another control B. What that means is that everything between those two control Bs, up arrow Bs, is going to be printed out as boldface. I want to show you some more things about WordStar very quickly. I'll briefly touch on them. And basically, I'm not trying at this point to explain exactly how you do each of these. What I'm trying to give you is an idea of all the capabilities of WordStar. And then at the end of all this, we'll look at this document and see what it looks like on the printed page to give you an idea of what you see on the screen versus what you see on the printed page. You'll notice a number of things about that. First of all, that WordStar generally shows you things on the screen about the way they will appear on the final printed page. That's unlike a number of other word processors in the microcomputer marketplace. I'm moving my cursor down. I already explained what the up arrow B meant. An up arrow S means underline. So in this case, the word WordStar, which is surrounded by up arrow S's, will be underlined on our document when we get it out. I'm now going to go down, and notice that as I go down my document, the WordStar automatically follows me and scrolls pieces of the information off the top of the screen and brings new information on the bottom of the screen as I'm going down the document. By down the document, I mean down the screen. And I can do that one line at a time like I am right now, and I can go up also the same way, one line at a time. Or I can do it in big chunks at a time. So there are ways to get around the document very quickly. As a matter of fact, I can go to the beginning of the document with a single command, or I can go to the end of the document with a single command. So WordStar has lots of ways of getting to places within a document very quickly. What we're going to do now is we're going to try and find a specific thing within the document. So we will do a special command, and then we will look for the name of the company that produces this word processor, Osborne. It's asking me for options, and in this case, I'm not interested in any options. I want it to look for Osborne. Well, if you looking very carefully, you will find that my cursor, which is down here on the next to last row, I'm moving it back and forth so you can see it, went to Osborne. Now, if I have it repeat that command, it will look for the next Osborne, and sure enough, there's the next Osborne. I ask it to repeat that command, and it finds yet another Osborne. And one more time, it finds another Osborne, finds the last Osborne. Okay, so very quickly you can look for a piece of information that you know to be in your document and take your cursor to that position in the document. We can also, if we wanted to, Adam Osborne is very much known for his egocentrical attitudes and naming the company and the computer and his book company all after himself. Well, let's say I bought out Adam Osborne and I decided that this is going to be the Hogan Computer Company. So what we will do is we'll go back and we'll look for Osborne and we'll replace it with Hogan. Now don't tell Adam that I'm doing this. Okay, immediately it asks me for options. I don't want any options. Now you should see my cursor down towards the bottom of the screen blinking, which is indicating to me that WordStar wants to replace that Osborne with a Hogan. If I agree to that replacement, I press Y. Notice that it changed. And it's now, if you look very carefully, Hogan Computer. And I can repeat that command if I want to with the next Osborne. Notice again that the cursor is blinking. We're on about the fourth line down in the text. And I can replace that Osborne with Hogan by pressing Y, or if I don't want to replace that one, I could press N, and it won't be replaced. So you can do quick replacement. For instance, if you type a letter to one person and the only thing that changes in the next letter is the greetings at the beginning of it, you could very quickly make those changes and create a new letter to another person. Or if, for instance, just the dates change, you could quickly replace the dates. Or if a small piece of technical information changed in something that your description of a product that you were typing, you could quickly change that using those commands. I want to go down to the end of this document for a moment, because I want to show you one more feature of WordStar, and that's that there seems to be this row of hyphens down at the bottom of the screen. And now I didn't type those hyphens, and as a matter of fact, if I try and put my cursor on the row of hyphens, I can't, no matter how hard I try. Up one line, down one line. Left one character, right one character. Boy, I just can't put my cursor on that row of hyphens, so I wonder where it came from. Well, it's WordStar's way of telling us that that would be the end of the current page. And if you look over in the far right-hand margin, sure enough, there's a little P at the end of that row of hyphens. And that indicates that that's the end of our first page of the document. And we can verify that by, look at where the cursor is right now. It's on the word nearest. And if you look at the top of the screen, you see it says page 1. If I move down one line, I'm suddenly on page 2. Okay, so that's a second way that we can verify that that is indeed a page break. Now, WordStar has an immense number of options, and it takes a while to learn all of them. Basically, the recommendation that I have to most people is to get to the point where they're proficient in doing just about what I just demonstrated so far. In other words, be able to enter information, be able to do some minimal editing on that information, being able to move anywhere in the document, and being able to search for and replace, if you want to, pieces of information within the document. Now, there are other things that WordStar can do. It can help you with hyphenation. It can hyphenate words that come at the end, long words that come at the end of a sentence. It can take pieces of information and move them elsewhere in the document. You can save portions of the file onto diskette, but not all of the file. In other words, you have your choice of manipulating pieces of information. You can ask for more information from WordStar itself by typing the Control-J key, and it will give you help on a number of different subjects. For instance, if I want to find out about paragraph reform, the Control-B command, I could press Control-J-B, and WordStar will tell me information about that particular subject. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to just race through this real quick here. But it gave me essentially about 24 lines of information about the Control-B command. So WordStar can also self-prompt you and teach you more about how to use WordStar. There are other things within WordStar as well. For complex documents, there's something called decimal tabs, which allows you to tab over to a place and type a number, and at the point where you press the decimal point, that will be aligned at the decimal tab spot. So in other words, if you type a number 12345.67, 12345 will be on one side of the decimal point. The decimal point will stay at the decimal tab spot, and 67 will be on the other side of it. And WordStar will automatically do that for you. Or you can have regular tab stops. You can highlight information. You can set place markers. For instance, I can divide a document up into 10 different sections and jump immediately to the start of any of those sections. I can split a document up into many files, or I can take many documents and make them into one file. A whole wealth of different types of commands. Basically, just about anything that you'd wish for in a word processor is there in WordStar. And as a matter of fact, as you become proficient in all of the functions of WordStar itself, you'll discover that there are other things that you can add to WordStar to make it even more beneficial to you and give you more productivity. For instance, automatic spelling checking programs to check the spelling of your documents automatically. You can also add calculation capabilities to WordStar so that in addition to being able to just type in information, like you normally do with the word processor. You'll also be able to do all the functions that you normally could do on a four-function calculator within WordStar itself. You can also add the ability for WordStar to work with database programs to create mailing lists and to merge information into a form letter. But what you should have got from me in just this brief introduction to WordStar is that it's a fairly simple system to use. I only used, in the first portion of this tape, I only used 12 commands. And those 12 commands are very simple. I can teach you those 12 commands in approximately about an hour or an hour and a half of use. And our manual is a tutorial which teaches you those commands very quickly. Within something like 15 pages of text, you've learned the basic operating commands of WordStar and should be able to create and edit documents immediately. But WordStar will always hold out more. You can always go one step further. And so as your needs for word processing grow, you will always probably find that there's something else in WordStar that you can learn about that will improve your ability to turn out professional quality documents quickly. Hello, I'm Tom Hogan, Director of Software and Publications for Osborne Computer Corporation. And in this videotape, I'm going to introduce you to a program called CalC, which allows you to manipulate numbers, or what they call a worksheet. Like all the other Osborne software, CalC is extremely easy to load. Simply put in the diskette, press the reset button, and then press return. Once CalC has loaded into the system, it will identify itself with the display that you now see on your screen. At the bottom of the screen, notice that it says enter question mark for help or return to start. At this point, you could enter the question mark to get some information about what CalC can do, or you could just simply press return, as I will right now, to get to the worksheet. Now, CalC uses what's called a worksheet, and let me describe what a worksheet is. A worksheet is simply a set of columns and rows of information, and each particular column-row intersection is called a cell. Now, on our display right now, you will notice that there is an underline which appears in column A in row 1. This is called the Worksheet Cursor, and I'm now going to move it over. Notice that it's going across the screen back and forth. The Worksheet Cursor shows you the current cell. In other words, the cell that you are about to manipulate. Now, if the worksheet was simply the size of the screen, CalC wouldn't be the greatest program in the world. But notice what happens if I try and go off the right-hand side of the screen. The letters at the top of the screen change, and instead of having A, B, C, D, E, I have H, I, J, K, L. In other words, there are more columns out to the right of the screen, and as I move back and forth, I can see, in this case, 5 columns at a time. The same thing happens in the vertical direction. If I move my worksheet cursor down, notice that numbers start scrolling up. So that instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, in this case I had 7, 8, 9, 10 at the top of the screen. They put the cursor back, the worksheet cursor back in cell A1. Well, that's all fine and dandy. We've got a bunch of rows and we've got a bunch of columns, but you're probably asking yourself the question, why is this person telling me about rows and columns? What importance are they? Well, CalC is an extremely flexible program, and there's lots that you can do in any individual cell. For instance, I could enter a number. In this case, I'll enter the number 67, which is now in cell A1. And I could move my cursor down. Let's say I enter 55 in cell A2. I can refer to individual cells and, for instance, A1 plus A2. Now that's what's called a formula. And what's going to happen in this case is that instead of A1 plus A2 being entered into cell A3, what I get is the result of the formula, or in this case, 67 plus 55 is 122. Well, very quickly you should be able to start to begin to see some of the power of SuperCalc, because not only can I refer to just one cell at a time, but I can refer to many, many cells at a time. I'm quickly going to erase my sheet so that I can start over again. But what I want to do right now is show you some of the other functions of SuperCalc. All commands start with a slash. And at the bottom of the screen, what changes now is it shows me enter B, C, D, E, F, G, and a bunch of other letters. Well, I don't know what those letters mean, and if you're a newcomer to SuperCalc, you might not know what they mean. So what I want to do is press the question mark key. Now, anytime you do that in SuperCalc, press the question mark key. Anytime that you do that, what you get back from SuperCalc is a list of all the commands that are possible to you at that point in using the program. In other words, I could type B right now for blank, C for copy, D for delete, E for edit, F for format, and each one of those is described for me right now. What I want to do at this point is I want to use format, F for format. Notice that here it tells me that a format is to change the display format of cells, rows, or the entire worksheet. Well, we'll return back to the worksheet by pressing the return key. I still have my slash at the bottom of the screen, and I will press F for format. The minute I do so, the rest of the word format is filled in for me, reinforcing to the user, to you, exactly what it is that SuperCalc is going to do for you at this point. F for format. It also, right above that, will ask you for the next piece of information that it needs from you, inner level, global, column, row, or entry. Well, in this case, what I'd like to do is I'd like to make column A wider than it currently is. So I will press C for column. Again, SuperCalc will fill in the rest of the information. Now it's asking me for a column letter, so I press A. And now it's asking me to define my formats. And what I'd like to do here is set my column width at 15. I press return to process the command, and we come back, and lo and behold, column A is now 15 characters wide, and columns B, C, and D are all at the width that they were set at when we first came up. Well, there are other things that we can do within SuperCalc. There are a number of different formats that we can define. As a matter of fact, if I go back and do the F command and get to the point where it's asking me to define my format, I'm going to press the question mark key to let SuperCalc show you what formats are possible. You would press I if you wanted SuperCalc to display integer numbers. You would press the $sign if you wanted to have things displayed in dollars and cents. E for scientific notation. G for a best fit. Let SuperCalc figure out how to display things. If you would like to see a graphic display of numbers, then you would press the star key or the asterisk key. And you can right justify or left justify either numbers or text. And then down at the bottom, you can also set a default. In other words, go back to the way SuperCalc comes up when you first start the program. I will again specify my 15 characters. And we have a column A of 15 characters wide. I can enter text in an entry, just like I can with a word processing program. Now, despite the fact that column A is only 15 characters wide, if there is nothing to the right of that column, it will display as many characters as you typed into that cell. However, if I go up to put something into the cell immediately to the right of that cell, it will allow me to put a number in there, for instance, and it will cut off all the rest of the text display on the screen. What I'd like to do at this point is now show you a sample of a completed worksheet in SuperCalc and show you some of the flexibility of that SuperCalc provides. To get a sample worksheet off the diskette, I've already put a sample worksheet there. I type the /L command for load, and then I tell it the name, which in this case I've titled it BRKEVN for break even. SuperCalc will go out, look to see if that file exists, and if it does, ask me if I want all or part of it, which I press A for all of it. The screen will reformat itself, and in a moment we see the pre-done worksheet, which in this case is a break-even analysis. Now, I'll put my cursor here, and let's do a break-even analysis of a special Hogan Gizmo. The Hogan Gizmo retails for $56.78. Development costs on the Hogan Gizmo were $5,000. My marketing costs were $10,000. My other costs were $2,100. Notice that where the cursor is sitting right now, where the worksheet cursor, the underline is sitting, those costs have already been added together for me. Let's come down here and now, per unit, the Hogan Gizmo costs $1.23 for labor, $5.95 for materials, $1.15 for packaging, and 45 cents for other. Notice also that it's added the total costs there per unit together. And down here a little lower, I want to see my break even for quantities of 100 at a discount rate to dealers of 50%. Well, what you can't see is that SuperCalc has been doing the break-even analysis off the screen where you can't see it right now, but I'm about to show you that break-even analysis. There it is. If I sell 100 units, given those assumptions that I entered just a moment ago, I will lose $15,139. Well, I don't want to lose any money. How many of these units do I have to make before I start making money? Well, apparently 900, or somewhere between 800 and 900, because at 900 I'm making $549. Well, what happens if I price my Hogan Gizmo a little higher? I'll move my worksheet cursor back over there, and let's say I sell it for $74.95. Notice that all the figures in the right-hand column, the minute I entered that $74.95, started to change. SuperCalc automatically did all the recalculations necessary because the worksheet had been set up to figure out those calculations based upon entries that I make in the left-hand column. And now I only have to make 600 Hogan Gizmos to make a profit. Now, if I'm really greedy, I could come up here and I could say, well, let's sell the thing for $124.95. And now I only have to sell 400 of them. This is one of the greatest powers of any of the calculation type programs like VisiCalc or SuperCalc or MagicCalc, and there are some others. And that's that they answer what-if questions. In other words, what if I sold my Hogan Gizmo for X number of dollars? And I get an answer back. What if I sold it for a different number of dollars, Y dollars? I get an answer back. But I get that answer almost immediately. All I have to do is set up a worksheet once with my assumptions about the product and then stick in my numbers, and I will get my answer back immediately. And you can do this for a number of things. We've seen people using SuperCalc to keep track of grades. Teachers have used it to keep track of grades. We've used it internally at Osborne Computer to do our budgets. We've had people do break-even analysis and balance sheets for their companies to see how their company is doing, and if they made a slight change here or there in the company's balances, what effect that had on the bottom line. And if you think that SuperCalc is merely just suitable for business applications, let me very quickly show you a scientific application. And we'll load a file that I prepared, which is called Barrier, which does a technical analysis of an air barrier. In this case, an air barrier, I have to do a little bit of explanation here because an air barrier isn't intuitively obvious, but an air barrier is essentially a door that's created by air force, by a wind. And we can go in here and we can set this up, and we can change the cold storage room. Let's say it's only 25 degrees, and the warm storage room is 75 degrees, and immediately we know all of the other things about that design for that particular air barrier that we want to put together. In this case, it's a mechanical device, and it would be essentially the work of a contractor to actually physically design this from these specifications that we just put together. But my point is that SuperCalc is also quite adaptable to other things besides business, in this case a more scientific or practical application. So the summary out of all of this is SuperCalc is a very sophisticated program that allows you to manipulate columns and rows of information, whether it be numbers or text or other types of data, and be able to develop formulas between those rows and columns, those cells, as I described them earlier, of information, based upon some fixed assumptions, and then test it against other assumptions using kind of a what-if approach. In other words, by making a change to a single cell, what's the overall effect on all of the rest of the information in that worksheet? And that's the power of SuperCalc.